Good morning, everybody. My name is Inga Cotton. I'm the founder and executive director of San Antonio Charter Moms, and we're online again. It is Thursday, May 21st for a Charter Moms chat. And today we have a special guest. We have Andrew Sterbenz, who is the senior director of curriculum management at Basis Ed. And so he is dialing in from Arizona. But what he has to say is very relevant for the Basis schools here in San Antonio. So in San Antonio, there's Basis Primary Medical Center. There's a Basis Primary North Central. They're adding a new Basis campus, Basis Primary Northeast. And then there's Basis Chavano on the northwest side that offers middle school, high school. So, and there's also a Basis campus opening in Austin. That's maybe a little bit outside our area, but that's exciting that there's new Basis schools opening up. Okay, so Andrew, his background is as in English Lit. He was the subject mentor in English, and he taught 7th grade English at Basis. So, at Basis Chandler, right, which is in the Phoenix area, right? And
Yep.
so you live in Tempe, and you have 3 kids. Do all 3 of your kids go to Basis?
Actually, all my kids are really
No.
little. My
Oh,
oldest
okay.
one is, he's just getting to that age, and we don't live right near Basis School, so we're figuring out the
Okay.
long-term answer for that.
Got it. Okay. Okay. Good. Okay. So now you wrote a wonderful guest post for us that we published at the very end of April, and it was about remote education at Basis and about how Basis made a really rapid transition. So right, it's like during spring break, a lot of things were up in the air, and then a lot of schools kind of declared, an additional week or two of spring break, and families were kind of on their own. But Basis very rapidly, like instead of just extending spring break was like, okay, families, here's the plan. And, I remember seeing pictures of like the teachers in the gyms, like socially distanced, spread out, but doing their professional development so that they knew how to get started on all these remote learning systems. And so I was just really impressed with how quickly the turnaround happened. And the Basis families that I know, they were really surprised at how quickly it ramped up and how much rich learning their kids were able to do while working from home. So I guess what I'm wondering is like, what did Basis Charter Schools do like in advance so that it was such a smooth transition to doing remote education?
Yeah. Well, I think that the answer is that we were thinking about it really early on. And so our senior leaders, CEO, COO, were meeting basically daily from, January and February. They were
Wow.
talking about these questions of like, we're watching China, we're watching New York, we're watching all the numbers, and we're saying, this is getting bigger. There's people are starting to come up with contingencies and schools are closing. But well before schools were closing in the country, we were thinking schools are going to close and we're going to have something in place. And so the answer is just that we were meeting about it all the time, thinking through the questions of how are we going to sort of hold to our curriculum. When it came time to pull the trigger, we have a whole bunch of different policies in place that are sort of thrown off by distance learning. And so we basically had thought out each one of those well before our students were told, you're not coming back here. And so we didn't know until we decided schools are closed and we're not coming back. We never knew for sure when or how it would happen, but we were really thoughtful about the fact that it was going to happen at some point, or if it was going to happen, what were we going to do about it?
Right, right. Was the timing similar in Arizona and in Texas for the school closures?
Yep. And we were reading, I can't remember exactly which state. I think Texas probably said first that, schools are closed. But we were reading it and we were saying, like, it was honestly like a live stream in offices of like, oh, Texas said they're closed. And we figured it was going to come before it did come. And, but as soon as they did, we sent out the emails and sort of said, this is how it's going from here. And I'm sure that your readers know that it has been the same for schools as it has been for parents, which is like two-week increments of, okay,
Right.
schools are closed, like everything's
Right.
closed, and we keep watching for those days when it's not going to happen. But so it's everything we do, even now, as we're thinking about next year, everything is just reading the news. It's following along. It's trying to ask people who might have some idea of what's going on. It's following what's happening in other cities around the world, and everything is like planning for 3 different contingencies always.
Right. That's been hard on families. It's probably been hard on the teachers too. Right, because like when schools closed, it's like, well, it's closed for the next week or two, right? And then they would extend the closures, and then they'd extend it again, and then finally, there's a point where they said, well, there's only a month left. Like, does it make sense to bring kids back for only a month? And then it's summer, so they said, okay, fine, schools are closed for the rest of the year, right? But it's not like in March you knew that it would be distance learning through the end of May, right? And
No,
you had
definitely.
to keep adapting. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely you didn't know. And at the same time, you there was always a conversation of this is maybe for the end of the year, this is maybe for 2 weeks, this is like it's crazy because in Arizona the numbers were really low. In Texas too, like
Right.
the numbers were not,
Right. The number of
catastrophic in terms.
cases.
Yeah,
Right.
exactly.
Right.
And so it's this thing of like what piece of data do we look at that says like, oh yeah, this is the thing that's making everybody decide, right? And so
Right. Right.
we were tracking the data, but the data didn't tell us everything. So we were also having to read just, what is our local government saying?
Right. Right. Yeah. So can you tell me more about, I guess, um, like what was the, like from leadership side, like I guess like what systems, or I guess like did Basis already have some of these systems that y'all were using, but just for different purposes, right? Like did you already have Microsoft Teams that
Yeah, good question.
the school system was using, but like maybe the students weren't using it, or things like that? Like, so things like you already had some experience, but just you had to like
Yeah.
repurpose it for distance learning.
Well, the answer is that in a lot of ways we did not have these systems set up. We had Microsoft Teams because we're a Microsoft company, and so we have
Mhm.
Office 365. But here in the office where I work in, I was one of like 3 people who was walking around before, COVID and everything. I was walking around, hey, everybody should start using Teams. It's really great. We can, and everybody's still using Skype, and it was very much like I was the guy who was trying to convince people that there were these good things happening. And then it went from that to people saying, hey, we think Teams is going to be the thing. And then that went to, okay, so we better become like super experts on the thing, and we better start training our, school leaders really quickly. And it went from, I think I shouldn't say like I'm the only one who was doing it, but in my office, there weren't a lot of people using Teams.
Right.
So then we end up in this place of like, okay, we're having a meeting on Microsoft Teams, and everybody's like, what's Microsoft Teams? And we went from that to everybody's chatting each other, everybody's calling each other, there's dialing into 5 different meetings a day, and that was on the administrative side pretty quickly that we were there, and those meetings were serving as a like also training and a like preface for what it was going to look like in our classrooms. And so we'd be imagining, like how we're going to use the video meeting system in Microsoft Teams. And then we're exploring the classroom function of the platform. And we're saying like, how are we going to set up our grades? How are we going to set up our turn in assignments? And then literally I'm in there like setting up fake classrooms and turning in assignments to myself and calling somebody and saying, hey, can you turn in this assignment? Now try it as a picture. Now try it as a, like every single one of those.
Right.
A lot of our students use these Android tablets for textbooks. The system
Right.
that we
Oh
have is
yeah, I've
called
seen
Sport.
those. Yeah.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
those tablets are really cool, and they have some really great capabilities, but they're also very locked down. And
Oh, right.
so we went from, okay, the way those tablets were initially set up was not to allow students to use the features of Teams. It was very much serving as the textbook, and we've opened them up throughout the process. And again, we're calling
Wow.
IT and saying, okay, now can you turn it in from the tablet? So the whole entire system was absolutely not in place.
Right.
But it was in place, like we had it sort of behind the scenes rolled out in our prep. But then when we finally called all the teachers, got them in meetings, and like, this is your new way of teaching. It wasn't the thing that they were using to manage their classrooms prior to going to remote learning.
Right. Right. So it's like you had the tent kits in storage, right? But then you all of a
Right.
sudden it's like, okay, here's your
Yeah.
tent, set it
Right.
up.
Absolutely.
Right. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. So it sounds like, I mean, there's just like two aspects of this. One is the fact that people in leadership, even in January, were following the news and had a sense that school closures might be coming. So let's prepare for that contingency. And then it was a matter of being very adaptable and saying, okay, these are the tools we have, right? We're a Microsoft company. Let's use Microsoft Teams. Let's use these, Android tablets that we've been using as textbooks, but let's unlock some of the features and then
Hmm.
let students start using them to turn stuff in. And
Yep.
yeah, so it's partly preparation, but partly also being very adaptable to yeah, having to learn
Yeah,
stuff quickly.
totally. And
Yeah,
that's the like if you were to say, because we have gotten some good praise for using Teams, and I think that the whole thing is that our school leaders and our teachers were incredibly adaptable, right? Like they went from being like, okay, I've been teaching the same way for, you know, a long time. A lot of our teachers have been teaching before basis even for, you know, 30 years. And so
right,
they go from being this person who, I use my PowerPoints and I stand in front of the classroom and I move through the classroom and I'm all about like interacting with my students in a certain way. And I believe that's how, like, that's fundamental to how a lot of teachers think, is classroom management and
right,
proximity and all these sorts of, and so they went from that to like, your world is upside down and you have the same responsibilities, only it's totally new to you. And in some ways it's like, it's very different than just what basis has always stood for, right? We haven't always
right,
really pushed to be super, we haven't used the latest software in order to send grades home to parents. We have like a
right,
lot,
right,
we're very sort of bare bones in some of those ways. And we've always sort of valued like just true like teaching with really smart people in the room who are really passionate about what they're doing. um, and in a lot of ways I think that translates really well to online teaching, because those people are, I think, still going to be the best equipped to deliver the content to our students. But the whole entire medium was, it's painful, right? It's painful
yeah.
for a lot
So
of us
much
to see.
change. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
totally.
The feedback I've heard from families is that like, so when their students like they log in to Microsoft Teams, they're able to watch a video of a teacher presenting, and so like then the teacher might have like the whiteboard there with them, so they're they're writing the equations like they would on their whiteboard. And I guess the on one plus side is that like if it's a parent watching with their student, they can like pause the video and like have the student it's like they're raising their hand. The student has to generate the answer, and then it reinforces that recall, right? So the mental processes are still working. And then the feedback I've heard from parents is that the engaging way that the teacher is presenting the information is still coming through the video. So I think that's something where it's like these are still basis teachers, right? They're still
Yeah,
bringing their passion and their like subject matter expertise to what they're teaching, even
yeah,
though it's through a video screen. And it must be hard for the teachers though, because they're not able to read their audience, right? There's nobody like holding up a whiteboard, with an answer on it.
yeah.
So they've had to
Well,
learn to
so
adapt.
absolutely learn to adapt. And you're really like, so we do it differently at different grade levels, at different schools are all having different so some students are doing live instruction, and that live instruction is happening at various degrees depending on whether it's, like an AP physics class versus a primary, math class or something like that.
Mhm.
But the answer to your question is, it's super weird, right? It's super weird to think about, because again, we're trained to look at a kid in the eye, and we're trained to like think about like, do you get this? How do I know you get this? How can
Right.
I sort of check in with you and make sure that that's happening? And we've had to come up with different ways of doing that sort of check for understanding that you're talking about with the whiteboards, when we're doing the live, synchronous um, lessons. But then the other part of that too is that even those lessons, we're not having 100% attendance when something is live, and we're not requiring 100% attendance, because it's hard to, it's, you have a kid at a primary school and you have a kid at a high school, and you have one computer in your house that's available for your students, and the high school and the primary aren't coordinating with, what time the lessons are happening, and it's not really possible for us to do it. And so
Right. Right.
it's not fair to say you have to be online at this time, this is when it's happening. So all those things are recorded and able to be sort of digested after the fact too.
Yeah. Yeah. Actually, and that brings up a point that we had talked about. I think you touched on this maybe in your guest post, but it became even more of an issue as the semester went on, that Basis has changed some of its evaluation policies and some of the grading policies, because if students are working from home, right? I mean, I think it's part of Basis culture that excellence matters and evaluation matters, and like the middle school students take the comprehensive exams to make sure that they've really mastered the material before they move on. but Basis has kind of adapted, changed grading policies, and so I don't know. Can you kind of comment on that, or,
Yeah.
and how it's been received? Yeah.
So grades, assessment, scores, like those things are things that we care about, and that we believe that we can write a good test, and that good test can be a measure of, is the student ready for the next year? And by ensuring that they're ready to be promoted and move on, we can like have rigorous classes, and we can ensure that the students who are in those classes are prepared. And that's sort of foundational to us. And it's foundational to, I've worked for Basis for 8 years, and my first year of coming on board, we did these comprehensive exams, and I was at a brand new school, and the only schools we were going to sort of be compared to were the legacy schools like Basis Scottsdale and Chandler that had been nationally ranked. And I remember this like, wow, this is crazy, right? My students are going to take the same test that these other kids have been preparing for a lot longer than my brand new 7th grade. And so you work at Basis, and you sort of get that comes into your blood, right? Those comprehensive exams is like something that we're passionate about, and our teachers collaborate on creating them across the network. Like whether you're a brand new teacher at a brand new school, anyone can propose questions that can go into our test bank that can end up on those tests. And so everybody sort of buys into like that. That's part of being here, is like we buy into this idea that these assessments are big. And frankly, like they count for a ton, right? Like if the 7th grade comprehensive exam is 50% of the student's grade for the entire year. So there's that reality for us. And then there's the reality of like everybody's life is crazy right now, right? Everybody's life is, like, some kids are, both parents work, and they truly count on, like, it's hard. They can't be there live, and they can't ask the question that they need to ask it the moment that they need to ask it. But there's a pop quiz at the end of the day, and like all these sorts of things that if we just sort of tried to be exactly how we were in terms of assessments,
Right.
it probably wouldn't have been fair. It probably wouldn't have been the thing that our kids would like just some kids wouldn't have scored as well as they would have otherwise. And so and the other part of that is like, we were all figuring it out. Our teachers were figuring it out. They had a technical difficulty while they were teaching a lesson, and they, are they still going to have that same homework assignment? Are they still like, everything was just, we wanted to make sure that we were putting our students first in terms of understanding their reality, understanding the reality of their parents. And so we sort of did two things. And the other part of it is, if we had decided to stick to our same old grading policy, we probably would have had to really pump the brakes in terms of what content we were going to teach.
Right.
Because we'll just make tests that emphasize entirely the first 2/3 of the year. Like that would have been like a possible solution there. So the policy we adopted was, no, we're going to like keep teaching, and we're going to treat this like it's not regular life, right? But we're going to treat it like we still have content to do, and we're going to still do new things, and we're
I think
going
that's good. It's good for morale, I think. I
Right.
mean, I've been pushing my kids pretty hard, and I think it's good for them, because it's like, look, we're cooped up, but we can make the most of this time, right?
Yeah,
And
exactly.
and let's be who we are. Let's express ourselves, right? We are people who believe in excellence. So let's do it, right?
Yeah, and so the reality is that we adopted a plan, a no harm grading plan for the rest of the year. And that no harm grading plan meant that students could improve their grade throughout basically the last third of the year. They could, if they wanted to, and if they achieved well, their grades for the last third of the year could help them out a whole bunch, right? It could skyrocket their grades. Well, not skyrocket, but obviously it's a whole other third of the year that, you could go from a B to an A or whatever. But if your grades didn't improve, if your grades didn't get better, we weren't going to hold it against you. And so our students still took comprehensive exams. They're still taking the AP exams that we use for our grade calculation. Like, all those things are still happening. And in a way that's remarkable, considering the reality, which is that the stakes are not as big as they were before, in terms of like, oh, my GPA, right? The stakes became something different, which was what you were talking about, like excellence in learning. And I'm here because it's remarkable how our students continue to be here for the sake of learning, for the sake of, and I think that comes a lot from our teachers, and our teachers sort of like emphasizing, like, I have a lot to teach you still. You and our students who think, like, yeah, well, next year I'm moving to 8th grade next year, right? I'm moving to high school next year, and I see the math that I'm learning now as the foundation for the thing that's gonna be the following year. And so it's true, I could still have my A and not really, take that, like not get the best score on that test. But the crazy thing is that they still did, right? They still came, they still took the test, they still were participating in our student hours and coming, like the conference hours with their teachers. They were coming and asking tons of questions. I dropped in on these sessions where the kids are, it's a virtual room where it's an optional time for the kids to be there, and they're like, okay, but how'd you do this one? And the teacher's like working the math problem on the screen. And the frequency with which that's happening is it's really cool and really exciting.
Yeah.
And it really said something, I think, about our teachers and our students, that the level of engagement stayed, and in some cases not increased, I guess, but the level of, like, there were some students who, and this is probably the case that you've heard this from other schools too. We had a lot of students who did way better suddenly. We had some students who were, finding that this type of environment and the work that their teachers were putting in actually worked out really well for them. So it's
Yeah.
been pretty cool.
Yeah, my son's like that. He actually, distance learning is actually a better fit for him than being on campus.
So that's cool.
He's really enjoying it. And what you're talking about is, I think a lot of families have been wondering about motivation and, like, how do you keep your kids motivated to keep learning even if it's distance learning? And I think what's happened to Basis is this totally unplanned experiment of, like, if you take away the grading pressure and you take away the structure of the school day, is the motivation still there? And I think what you've discovered is that for most kids, the intrinsic motivation is there because they have curiosity. They want to, like you said, they want to keep building on the knowledge so that they can, unlock, these other achievements like later in their careers, right? They have like certain AP classes that they want to plan for in the future, and that they're still learning. And I think it's a wonderful thing. And like also you said that the Basis teachers play a role in that, right? That
Yeah,
the
totally.
relationships that they've built with the students, that the students want to keep logging in and keep asking questions, even if it's voluntary student hours, they're still coming in and asking questions. Right?
And I think that it's that intrinsic motivation, like, coupled with like accessibility and flexibility from their teachers, right? So I would have felt like this massive pressure of, if my school had been having online classes and they were all live, and I had to be there live all the time, like, that would have been really,
Yeah.
tricky to do. And I think that the cool thing about the flexibility that we've given our students is that there's not a lot of excuses too, right? There's not a reason to not participate. There's not a, like, oh, my mom had to take me to, I had to sit in the car with my mom while she ran to this, like that sort of, like, that isn't an excuse, because it's all still there, right? It can all be done
Yeah.
asynchronously. And so the parents are able to sort of like plan and give their kids access to that same content. And the teaching, the lessons that we're preparing have to be accessible asynchronously, and we require that of our teachers, that you're not just doing it in a way that only the kids who are live that are able to participate. And so by being flexible with the students, we've not created this environment where they can just sort of check out.
Do you think the fact that Basis teaches so much like study skills, like using the CJ, and like, like that the students have some time management skills that are helping them to manage the asynchronous remote learning?
I think so. And I think in some ways that the asynchronous, like the environment of Teams and being able to sort of like scroll through, like the CJ, the communication journal, is a thing that we're like really proud of, right? Which is that our
Yeah.
kids come into the classroom and they write down at the beginning of the day, like, this is what's due, and we don't post grades online, and we don't like all of these things are things that we think, like, we're going to teach our students to be responsible for this. And if you talk to people about like the secret sauce that makes us Basis, it won't be long before they have a conversation about like student responsibility and this, and like basic things like if a parent wants to know what grade a kid has in the class, they can reach out to the teacher and they can have a conversation. But usually the way that parent knows is they're talking to their son or their daughter, which is something we're really proud of. And so that sort of like ownership that we teach them to have, I'm certain that has to have translated to them working well online.
Yeah, yeah. Well, it's a slight tangent, but like, well, actually, no, this is next on the list. So Microsoft Teams, like people have, yeah, families are just really curious about this. Like the Basis families are really happy with how the school has implemented Microsoft Teams, but it's different than like, so like my kids are using Google Classroom. A lot of schools are using Google Classroom or other systems, and in some schools it's kind of a mishmash of, it's like, well, for this you use this login, and for this it's Zoom, and this, and sometimes they feel kind of overwhelmed. So I'm just wondering about like what choices has Basis made, in how you set up Microsoft Teams, like how you protect student privacy, what features you've turned on, what things you've chosen not to implement because it would make it too complicated.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think that Microsoft Teams is a good tool, and we're really happy with it. I think that the best thing about it is that we chose to lean pretty heavily into it. And so by saying we're going to be like Teams and we're not going to do Teams and Zoom and these three other sort of platforms, I think that the fact is like that has to be like that is huge for our families, right? It's huge for if you have a first grader who the teacher's like, okay, today, did you set up your account for this website so that we can all go and do this? And I know that it's happened in some cases, and some of our teachers have found some really great resources and they've implemented them, but we have really sort of like one of the things that we were thinking as we were thinking through Teams was accessibility for all of our families. And like what's going to be the easiest thing, and we had teachers pushing back on like, well, I want to use this one too, and I want to incorporate this, and in a lot of cases the answer was yes, you can do that because we want to give our teachers some of those choices. But also we pushed back in a number of instances and said, okay, but this is part of like why this decision is here, and have you thought about how much easier it might be for your students to get really good at existing in this one sort of like cohesive environment as opposed to several different ones. You asked about different access and things. So our students, they participate in these classroom meetings, but it looks a lot like a Zoom call or something, and you can even do the view where it has like 9 different faces up on there. Only none of their faces.
The Brady Bunch screen,
Right, yeah.
right? But with like icons for each
Right.
kid, right? Yeah.
Yeah, because for us, our students don't have video access turned on, so they're participating in those meetings with audio and through the chat function, and they're typing in like the questions that they have, but their video isn't turned on. And there are a couple of reasons behind that, but one is the first thing is we asked our schools, like, do you want your students to have this? And so we asked the leaders at the schools, and almost unanimously they said, we can see some benefits to it, but we can also see some things that are going to be less than beneficial for us. And so let's decide, not to turn it on. And the other thing is just like the protection of privacy. We in Teams, we created these classrooms, right? And so it's very much a sort of isolated environment where we created logins for our students. Everything that exists in Teams comes from us. In a way that isn't necessarily the case with like a Zoom account, where we tell a kid, hey, go get a Zoom account, and then that's your Zoom account that you can use to call in, right? For Teams, it's everything that like we're creating it all. And so we would have been creating an environment where our students would have been video calling each other, which again, it's probably not the end of the world, but we just thought in the name of like protecting their privacy and making sure that we just didn't see benefits that outweighed the sort of like potential consequences of granting that access to them. And so far it's worked out great. And they still have the chat feature, and some of them still, send each other 4,000 chats a day.
We have a comment from a reader, Jennifer Schreiner. They have, let's see, they're at Medical Center campus, I think. She said, really enjoying Microsoft Teams with a kindergartner. And I think that's wonderful that even young kids are able to participate that way, right? I've heard that like when one kid is speaking, their box kind of lights up on the screen so that the students know who's speaking, and they still have a sense of community in the class.
Yeah. I think that in some ways Teams and Zoom and all these things were created for kids. Like it's magic to them, right? to see all their friends, and especially the younger ones. And I think that probably some of the parents that at our schools, just like everywhere, there was this essential initial Zoom magic of like, oh wow, my kid, they sit on Zoom and they participate, and that's great. And it went from that to this like exhausting, like, oh my kid is like, I'm over Zoom meetings now. But I think that we're not doing an hour a day of Zoom with kindergartners, right? Or Teams or whatever, right? We're not those things you don't have to look very hard to see the stories of parents who are saying like, oh, that daily Zoom with my first grader, and it's like, I'm over it. So it's not happening with that frequency in most cases. What's happening is, in a lot of cases, it's that like an art teacher who's recording a cool lesson, right? And she's doing it herself, and she's showing the students how, like, maybe she's doing a, Picasso sort of like presentation, and she's talking to them about Picasso, and then she's also, there's another lesson that's there that's, okay, now we're going to do our Picasso drawings, and they're separate, like sort of digestible small things, and then we're going to get together as a class at the end of the week, and we're going to have this chance for us to interact with each other, and so I think that there's like a magic to not to balancing it, right, to providing the opportunities for those things, but also not crushing anybody.
Yeah. Well, okay. So we wrote your post. It was, we published that back at the end of April. I think now a lot of families are wondering about back to school, and at least in Texas, it seems like a lot of schools things are still up in the air, and they're just having to plan for different contingencies. So is that kind of where basis is at, kind of in planning for different contingencies, but there's no clear answer about what things will look like in August.
Right. Yeah, and we're planning for different contingencies in Arizona, Texas, Louisiana, Washington D.C. So it's all over the place. And the answer is like, we don't know, right? Who can tell right now? Where we are right now, it's like states are opening up, and it looks like things are, but nobody knows what that means for 2 weeks from now, let alone 2 months from now. So we have plans for, like, the dream is, hey, life is good, and we can go back to school, and everybody can be there, and we can feel safe, and we can be in compliance with, federal and state authorities. The other side of that is so there's that end of the spectrum, all the way to, we'll be ready to provide entirely online instruction the way that we're doing it now, and if we go into next year, maybe things will shift a little bit, from how we're doing it now. Like if this was let's figure this out, let's make sure our teachers know what Microsoft Teams is, let's make sure they know the environment. This year, we will have had an opportunity to, do our normal summer training with our teachers, where we can prepare them in a way that while we're really happy with how it's going now, we think we can do even better. It's also very likely that we're going to have some sort of hybrid, where either students are partially online, partially in person, and they do some sort of A/B schedule, where a portion of the students are there so that they can have different distancing practices in place. So it's everybody's biggest question. It's the one we all walk into the office and say, like, I had this idea last night, and this is a way we can, but there's so many things that it's hard to really know what's going to be for sure.
Yeah. So you can just map out a few possible scenarios, prepare as best you can for those, so that whichever path reality takes, you have a plan in place, and you can execute it as in the best possible way, and still being true to basis culture and values and goals, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, great. Okay. Well, I think we've gone over our goal of half an hour, but we just had so much to talk about. But do you have any like final thoughts or things you want to share with either basis parents or future basis parents in San Antonio?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the thing that I would just say is we're excited about our future. We're excited to be back in a classroom with our students. Like, that's the thing and I'm sure this is the case for every teacher, like, we're dying for it, right? We're dying for a chance to see their faces and to be around them again. And our schools in Texas, we're excited about the new ones that we're opening. And we know that there will be a day when these new buildings open and they're full of new students and great teachers and great administrators. And we do hope that your readers and listeners will give us a chance a consideration to come check out those new campuses. But until then, we're going to be doing what we're doing, and we're going to be doing our best to be prepared for every contingency.
Yeah, good. Okay, well, and we'll keep informing our readers in the Facebook discussion group and on the blog, and so that families know what to expect in the fall. Is once we know, once there is information to share, we'll be sharing it in the group. So
awesome.
Okay, well, thank you so much for being on Charter Moms Chats. I really
thank you for
appreciate
having
it.
me.
Okay.
We'll talk to you
take care.
again. Bye.